Hello everyone and welcome back to Ratting Road. So over the last couple of weeks I've been working hard, scratch building the remaining of the OHLE structures that I needed to complete the electrification. I needed to build another 8 in total from where I left off, and I built all of those 8 structures in over the last couple of weeks in the free time that I had. I built 7 headspans and 1 portal. Whilst I was posting these up on Facebook, I had quite a few people want a how-to video on how I made them. And at the time I didn't really think it would be that interesting because you're just soldering metal together pretty much. But after a while I realised that there's pretty much nothing on YouTube about how to scratch build anything. And also there's very little on the market in terms of ready to run for multi-track main lines. So Dapo and Pico make masts to cater for 2-track main lines, but if you have 3 or more, you're pretty much limited to what you can do. I personally think scratch building is the way to go because you can build something more bespoke and you can also say that you built it yourself. So I went down that route and the result is what you can see in front of you now. So I had a bit of a rethink and thought filming myself building one wasn't such a bad idea, and hopefully it gives people a bit of an insight on scratch building in general and also how to obviously build them up, and hopefully it'll motivate a few people as well. So that's the video I bring for everyone today. I sincerely apologise in advance for how long this video is. It's been quite a long process filming it, and building a headspan without filming takes a good 2 or 3 hours once you know what you're doing. So you can imagine that when you're filming it, it sort of slows it down considerably. But nonetheless, I hope people learn a few things and getting a bit of an insight on how it's done, and gives them some motivation to do this sort of thing on their own layout. But without further ado, I'm going to get straight into the video and I hope you enjoy watching it. So like with anything else on a model railway, you need to do your research into the area you're trying to model, and in this case OHLE as well, so then you know what to build. Otherwise you'll run the risk of building something that's wrong and you won't be happy with it and it won't look right. OHLE is very diverse and technical. There's loads of different designs going on and generations. It all changes based on location, surroundings, track work, pretty much anything. So make sure you do your research on it just so you know what to build for the different areas of your layout. So I like to build my layout focusing on the Northern Great Eastern Main Line, so that's where it's roughly based on. And in the real world, Mark III generation catenary is what you tend to see between Norwich and Colchester, and south of Colchester down to London is the Mark I generation. So if I was to have built the Mark I generation, then it wouldn't have really gone with the theme I'm modelling. So as I like to take inspiration around the Ipswich and Norwich area, that's the type of generation I went for on the layout. So all the different masts and structures I've built are based on the Mark III design. I've got several different types of masts just on the 2-track section, and then obviously I've got the headspans in the portals on this side. So I must have about 6 or 7 structures just on my small layout. So this is why it's important to do your research on it, so then you know what to build and in the different locations on your layout, because they do change a lot. But in this video, I'm going to be focusing primarily on the headspan design, which is this one. So you'll most commonly see this one on the East Coast main line where it spans more than 2 tracks. And this particular headspan is the one I'm going to be constructing up for you, so you get an idea of what it looks like now in its finished form. If you do have any more questions about these, then feel free to drop them in the comments or drop me a message. I'll be happy to answer any. I'm going to hand it over to myself from a couple of weeks ago and just get into the building of these. So I hope you enjoy the video. So today I'm going to be building the final 2 headspans up, so then the electrification on the layout is completed, and I'll just need to do the anchor masts for the tensioning on the non-scenic section in the future, so then I'll be ready to add all the wires once all the surrounding scenery is in place. But there'll be 2 headspans going in roughly around where my fingers are. I've already drilled the holes out. You won't be able to see them on camera, but I'll obviously show them a bit later on. So these are the headspans here, and I've done about 5 of these now. Once you get into a rhythm with these, they become a lot more easier to make once you understand what to do. The very first one I've done probably took me about most of the day, and the most recent ones have probably took me about a couple of hours maybe. So yeah, once you're in a bit of a rhythm and you know what you're doing, then it really does help speed things up. But I'll just show you now, and I'll start off with all the different tools and materials I use. So for your tools, you'll need a cutting tool such as a hacksaw or a Dremel, a thin file or any file just so you can file down sharp edges on the H sections, a hand drill bit to drill out some holes in the H section, your soldering tools and equipment, so your soldering iron as well, your flux and your solder, some wire cutters just to help trim the metals down, and a pair of pliers which will help you grip the wires when you come to solder them all together. So in terms of materials, you'd need a couple of brass H sections, and as you can see, they get their name from the shape. You can just about see that. They were bought from Eileens Emporium, and they come in 250mm and 500mm lengths. I went for the 250mm lengths, but in hindsight I wish I went for the 500mm, just so then I hopefully wouldn't have wasted as much material. And you'll need 2 of those per headspan. You'll also need some 0.45mm nickel wire, and these will form the headspan and the crossspan wires, and they also form part of the registration arms as well. You'll need 3 of these per headspan, and they come in a pack of 10, so obviously a pack will cover 3 or 4 headspans. They were also bought from Eileens Emporium as well. You'll also need 0.8mm brass tube. That's what I use to make the registration arms up with. One length will go probably maybe 2 or 3 headspans as well. And then you can get them from Eileens Emporium, or a lot of model shops do them as well. You'll also need some insulators, which are these things, and these were bought from Brass Locos. They come in a pack of 8, and they have a slot in them, so you can slot them over the nickel wire after you finish soldering. These are cast brass. They used to be 3D printed, but they've since changed the material. I actually prefer these, I think, because you can get them a little bit more accurate in places. I went for a pack of those per headspan as well. And then finally, there's a couple of 3D printed concrete bases here with a H cut out in them. They'll slot over the H sections when I'm finished, and they'll form some concrete bases. They were bought from Resin Printed Railways. So you get a rough idea on what you'd need per headspan. Some of it will cover multiple headspans, and some of it is only just for one. In terms of pricing, I'd imagine I probably spent maybe £15 per headspan in materials. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, but it is around that figure. You can decide whether or not you think that's expensive or not. I personally don't think it's too bad. I firmly believe a ready-to-run version would be considerably more money. But yeah, that's what you'd be looking at per headspan in materials. Before I get into the building process, I just want to make a quick point that I am building these to suit my layout. So there will be quite a lot of variation in what I do, and also to what you might do if you go ahead and build something. Just make sure you do plenty of research into the areas of OHLE that you want to sort of model, and obviously make sure everything's right for your layout. So the first thing I do is mark and cut down the brass H sections. This is an example of a variation, so I'm building these to suit my layout. So I've marked roughly where I need to cut them down by, so you'll just need to work on your own measurements and sort of decide for yourself how tall you want these to be. Once I've marked it and I'm happy with it, I'll then cut down the H sections with a Dremel or a hacksaw. Either of those will do just fine. And I'll just go over it with the file just to get any sharp edges off after I've cut it. With the H sections cut down, now I just need to mark where the span wires are going to go, and the span wires are your 3 wires that join these together. I always measure the headspan wire first, because that goes right at the top of the H sections, and I always mark those a couple of mil or so just down from the top. Obviously mark it on the end you didn't cut, because I always push the sharper end in the baseboard. And then once you've measured your headspan location, you can then do the crossspan, which is measured 25mm lower down. So starting at your headspan location, you want to mark it around 25mm, so around there, and then same again lower down. So the distance between the lower crossspan wire and the headspan wire is about 50mm. These are drilled out with a hand drill bit. So you can see the hole I've drilled there, and that's where the crossspan wires will slot into. So now I'll repeat the process for the other 2 lines and the other H section. So there we have the span wire holes drilled out in the desired locations. When you do these, you just want to make sure you go at a slight angle, because then it comes out the other side of the H section. So you can see the holes coming through the other side there, and that's where the span wires will slot into and just get soldered to. So now I've got the holes drilled on the H sections. I'm going to place them into their holes. Now I like to build these up in situ, because then you know where everything's going to go. They're much quicker to put together as well. So now the first thing I'll do is I'm going to first solder the 2 cross span wires into place. So you want to get your strand of nickel wire, and then I'm going to measure the distance between the 2 sections. So that measurement is coming in at about 218 millimeters. This will probably vary on your own layout, so just keep remembering to check the measurements. So I've just cut my 2 strands of nickel wire to form the 2 cross span wires. So the cross span wires are your lower wire and your center wire. The top wire is called the headspan wire, which I will do later on. So you just want to thread them into the holes like that. So that's one. Might want to solder that one first actually. So now do the same the other side. You can maneuver the wires a little bit if you need to. So now that's nice and straight. So now same again, I'm going to solder it this side. Okay, so that's the 2 cross span wires now soldered in position, and they're nice and tight. It's important when you're doing the cross span wires to wedge whatever you can in between them or pull them apart, just so then you get the tension, because that will help massively when putting the mask together. You want it to be as strong as possible. And here's a closer look at the solder joints, and I know it's not the neatest of soldering, but as long as it's nice and flat, it doesn't really bother me, and as long as it's nice and strong. But the effect of drilling the holes and then slotting it in is that the solder bonds to the inside of the H section, the outside, and obviously it fills up that hole as well. So it becomes a much more stronger than what it would if it was just soldered onto the side. So the next stage now for this is to add the registration arms, which are these things. So these have been made out of the 0.8mm brass tube. So they were bent by hand using a pair of pliers. And then I've also used an offcut of the nickel wire at the top. And that will be where your top insulators will go. But I'll just show you how I put these together. So you get your brass tube, get your pliers, and then you want to just sort of hold them tight, twist it like so. So you can see how it's sort of gone all the way around, and then you want to bend the smaller bit back outwards, and then you end up with something like that. So you just do that until you've got the desired shape. I'm going to go at this one a little bit more because it's not quite matching. Bit difficult to film this, but there we are. But yeah, it's not far off, but yeah, I think just need to bend that smaller piece out a bit. So that's the registration arm now, so I'm happier with how that looks. And then what you can do is use one you've already done just to check the angle and everything is correct. It's, again, a bit hard to film, but that'll be all right, I think. So then now I just need to cut this down, trim it down with some wire cutters. And then what I've also done is with an offcut of nickel wire. So don't throw your offcuts of nickel wire because you'll need these for your top section. So you bend that into a 90-degree angle and then you'd solder it in line like that. But yeah, I'll just quickly do that for now. So after a bit of further trimming, you end up with something like that. And I've marked up, or I've used the one of the other ones just to sort of line it up to check it's all matching, which it does. That's your registration arm where your contact wire will be soldered onto. And then the smaller part at the top, that's where the catenary wire, the upper wire, will get soldered onto. So now what I need to do now is just bend this a little bit and just trim off some excess. Okay, and there we go. This is the sort of look you're going for when you're all finished. So because I'm only a 3-track main line, I need to make 3. Obviously if you're a 4 or 5 tracks or however many, then you just need to make however many that you need. And then what I do, once I've added the nickel wire, I position an insulator next to it and then just make a mark and bend it straight vertical. So where you want it pretty much pointing straight upwards in line with the vertical H sections. And then once I'm happy with the angles, I just cut them back to however long I need them. So again, you'll just need to check how long you need those to be trimmed back by, because there are certain measurements. So in my case, because I'm a 3-track mainline, or I've made a 3-track headspan, the outer arms, so these ones get cut down to 12mm, and then the center one gets cut down to 5mm, and then that will give the correct shape for the headspan wire. So these are now ready to be added, so I'm going to get on doing that. So I've just fitted one of the registration arms, and I'm using one of my Bachmann Class 90s to test it's all in the right location. I won't go into all the technical side of things, but this is where it starts to get a little bit technical. This is where you need to do, or this is why you need to do your research when it comes to OHLE. But in my case, I was looking for around 4mm to the outside, and in this case, you can just about see it's there. So I'm happy with the positioning. So now I'll continue forward and install the rest of the registration arms. So I've soldered the other 2 registration arms onto the headspan now, and as you can see, I'm using the Class 90 again just to check they're all okay. So that's the 3 registration arms in place now, and I also soldered them to the top crossspan wire as well. So what I need to do now is just fit the headspan wire, which is this one up the top. I've already soldered it to one of the H sections already because I jumped ahead of myself a little bit, but no big deal. So I'm just gonna now just solder all these together, and then it goes at the end there on the other side. And then finally we come to the last span wire joint. So then it goes up in the corner here in this last hole we drilled earlier. So as you can see, it's already starting to look like a headspan now, but we're not quite finished yet. But that should mark the end of your soldering. There's just one little piece I need to add just to make this a bit sort of bespoke and like I said, for my layout. So I'm just going to quickly do that, and then I can get on with adding the insulators. So the headspan is now out of its holes on the layout, and I've just brought it over to the workbench so I can fit the insulators. So that's what these things are. So these will slot onto the span wires along there, and I will need to fit 7 of these, and obviously just look at pictures just to see where they go. They can change around a little bit from what I've seen, but generally speaking you'll want a couple right on the ends there, and then you'll just want one in between each registration arm, and then one at the tops as well up there. So here's the insulators out of the packet, and as you can see they just come on this little sort of frame you just cut them out of. That's what they look like when they're loose. And then what I always do is I get another thin piece of the nickel wire and just slot it through just to clear any swarf or debris that might be in there. And there's been a couple of occasions where it's been quite difficult trying to get it on because there's been some like swarf obstructing it or something. These are 3D printed after all, so just shove a bit of nickel wire through them just to clear out any debris or whatever, and then they should go on nice and easily. So I'm just going to get on doing these. Okay, so I finished putting in the insulators and I've got them in their correct places pretty much. So again, you wanted one on the ends there, and then also just dividing up the registration arms, and then ones going above the registration arms as well, as per photos. So the final piece of the puzzle are these concrete bases. So again, these are 3D printed and they have a hole in the shape of a H ready to take the H section. So these just simply push on. Okay, that is pretty much the construction side of the headspan completed. So as you can see, it's now got its concrete bases, its insulators, and all the soldering work's been completed as well. So it does look quite cool, I think. It's not perfect, but to get these quite consistently is quite difficult, I found. And obviously I'm not experienced in this sort of field either, so I'm really happy with how this one came out. So this one's now ready to be primed, and then once it's dried out, it can then go on layout in full installation. So the headspan has now been primed just to give its overall colour. Still need to paint the span wires, but I don't do those until all of the wires are in place later on. But yeah, just need to give the insulators a nick of brown paint as well. But before I do that, I'm just going to just double check with the Loco just to make sure the registration arms are in the correct positions. So now that the wires are under their own tension now a bit better, you can see that the registration arm is off center to the pantograph. So I've already measured this, it is around 3 or 4 mil, which is what you're looking for. This will ensure that the stagger is correct when you come to add the wires later on. So I've just wedged all the junk back in there again just to make it nice and tight, and as you can see, it's not going anywhere. So that's the purpose of having all the junk pressed in the middle, because then it prizes everything open a little bit and it just makes everything nice and tight. And then when I come in tomorrow or whenever to remove the junk, it will remain nice and tight. So once you're happy with the positioning of the registration arms, the height of your wires, etc., what you can do is get a spirit level and just place it on top of the vertical H sections. And as you can see, the bubble is slap bang in the middle where it needs to be. So that just proves everything nice and level. So it just finishes it off nicely. You don't really want it to be wonky because otherwise it might show. And what I've done as well is just add burnt umber to all the insulators. They're a dark brown in real life, so I thought a burnt umber does the job quite well, and it just brings those out a little bit more, finishes it off nicely. I'll leave the span wires unpainted for now, just in their primer, because I still need to add all the wires in as well, so I'll paint those as and when I add the wires in. So what I'll do now is just come away, wait for the glue to go off, and then I can come and remove the junk, and then the wires should all remain nice and tight still. So the headspan has now been fully glued in, the glue has gone off, and I'm pleased with how it's come out. So what I'm going to do now is just fast forward and complete this last headspan off camera. So as you can see, I've fast forwarded and I've got built the final headspan now. So this is the final headspan in sequence, and this one is positioned in front of the scenic brake. And in the future there will be a bridge in front of this headspan, so I did need to build this one a little bit differently to the others. Not massively, but the difference between this one and the others is the addition of a registration arm for each track. So it's got 2 registration arms rather than just one lower down for your contact wire. This type of headspan you normally see in front of bridges and tunnels and other low structures, so that's why I had to build this one instead. Pretty much follow the same strategy as before. You just solder an extra piece of the brass rod in place for the registration arm rather than the nickel wire at the top. And as you can see, this one is fully completed now, so all of the electrification on the layout is now completed. So after a very long overdue clean up, tidy up and everything, I also cleaned the track, and I'm now just running some trains around just to see how they look running around underneath all of the new OHLE, and I'm really happy with how it looks, and I think they look really cool running underneath it. As I mainly run Platinum Class 90s at the moment, I'm yet to get a Helgen 86, but the Class 90s have their pantographs up, but I've set the CV value for the pantograph so it just clears the lowest registration arm on the layout. So when I add the wires in due course, then the CVs will get adjusted, so the pantograph will be in contact with the wires all around the layout. So obviously when you test all your OHLE, you just need to make sure you don't get any accidents or whatever, so just check your pantographs or do whatever you need to do with those. But yeah, I think you can agree that the trains running around this now do look quite cool together. So I hope you enjoyed this video and you've got some advice and some tips and some inspiration to try and give this sort of thing a go for yourself on your layouts. I do think it is the way forward if you want your overhead equipment to look realistic, and again, just do your research and just go by pictures. And if you do decide to go down that route, there really is no better feeling looking at something you've built yourself and knowing that you haven't like bought it out of a shop or whatever. So what I'm going to do now is I'll just round the video off with a little running session of some of my stock just running underneath this newly installed overhead equipment. If you have any more questions about these, then feel free to leave them in the comments, but yeah, I'll just leave you with the trains running around. So I hope to see you in the next video, and until then, take care and happy modelling. Bye.
Thank you.